Okay, one thing I wanted to do before we get into the season is do a little. This is one of my favorite topics, the hot seats, and just coaches that I think. I think sometimes you throw names that are like that guy's not going to get fired. Like we can talk about Mike McCarthy all we want. If Mike McCarthy wins 12 games again and they're hosting a playoff game or they win a playoff game on the road as a wild card, Jerry's not going to get rid of him. He's just not. It's one thing when you're going 8-8, and I understood back in the day when people were getting pissed about Jason Garrett. That made sense. If McCarthy's winning, I don't mean the Super Bowl. I just mean a lot of games, and you're in marquee playoff games, and he wins just another playoff game, even if he gets bounced in the second round, he ain't getting fired. That's just a fact. So I'm not going to waste my time on him, even though that's an easy one, and that's very polarizing. The other guy, I skimmed probably half the article on ESPN on basically John Gruden, on the Washington football team, Dan Snyder, and just the disaster that is the fighting over the emails. One thing that stood out in there is that Mark Davis, I don't think fired Gruden, or fought Gruden for like cause and tried to get out of that $100 million salary. Based on the reporting in that article that's written by like old school Big J's, is they reached a settlement. So Mark Davis, who is not by any means the richest NFL owner, I'm sure paid Gruden a large sum of money or is continuing to pay him some form of the $100 million. Maybe not all of it. Maybe they came to an agreement, but he's still paying him or paid him off. Mark Davis is not in a position to just fire people left and right. Now, Josh McDaniels, when you base things on history, you'd go, listen, it was a long time ago, but that Denver thing was a disaster. Last year looked weird. I think that regardless what happens, I would imagine Josh McDaniels getting a third year. Same with the GM. I think he's going to give a little runway. Mark Davis is a guy that does not want to go on coaching searches, right? He just doesn't. So I didn't put Josh McDaniels. I think he, more than McCarthy, would be my strongest honorable mention. Okay, starting at 5. Me and Colin last week talked about this guy. The elephant in the room with Belichick is he's not just on scholarship for life. And historically, like some great coaches, Bill Walsh kind of had a mental breakdown, left. He wasn't going to get fired. He just won the Super Bowl. Landry with the Cowboys, Jerry fired. Chuck Noll with the Steelers, I think, did the quote-unquote walk away. Now, even if Bill was fired, I was thinking about this today, actually. I think the Patriots would like to release something. Let's say they went 7-10. We have mutually departed, or we have just come to an agreement. It's just best. We both agreed. I think Bill is petty enough. I think he's old school enough. I think he's just prickly enough to refuse to put his name on that. So if it ever got to the point, I do think it would get ugly. Now, the reason I didn't put him higher on the list, because I think there's a potential for them to go 9-8, or even best case 10-7, miss the playoffs, and him still keep his job just because they're interesting enough, they're competitive enough, the stadium's still full, and it's like his equity with the franchise is enough to not fire him. I do believe, though, if they go under 500, 8-9 or worse, which 2 of the last 3 years, he has gone under 500. And even the year, which I thought was a pretty good coaching job in Mac Jones's rookie season when he went 10-7, they did lose in the wild card 47-17 to the Buffalo Bills. And if memory serves me correct, the Bills did not punt in that game. So it's one thing to lose to a random team. It's another thing to lose in the first round to a team in your division and get curb stomped like that. Happened a couple years ago to the Cardinals and the Rams. Remember when the Rams just we're your daddy? You guys are an embarrassment, and absolutely eviscerated the Cardinals on Monday Night Football in the playoffs. Those games sometimes, it's one thing to lose in the playoffs. The Cowboys lost in the second round. They had a formidable, admirable effort. It was not by any means an embarrassment. 47-17, that's hard, especially when you're used to the standard of the Belichick and Brady era. But to me, it's less about that season, more about 2 of the other 3 years. 7-9, obviously Brady won the Super Bowl that year, and last year 8-9, and it didn't really feel that close. So to me, they go 8-9 or 7-10. I think this is Bill's last year. And I'm not acting like he deserves to get fired or he's some complete failure, but it's not going well. And everyone, and a lot of coaches have talked about this, either their message gets stale. Sometimes it's just time for a change, right? You don't just keep a job in perpetuity that you don't own. And there are obviously a lot of variables. Historically, is Bill the nicest to the owner? It doesn't matter when you're winning. You're hosting playoff games. You're going to AFC championship games. You're winning Super Bowls. You're printing money for your owners. It's another thing when you're going 8, 9, 7, and 10. Everyone in town is talking shit about you and wondering, is it time for a change? So to me, Bill is right there at number 5. Number 4, I went to college here because I think when you factor in the brand and the move next year to the SEC, I think Steve Sarkisian needs to win double-digit games this year. Now, history would show us he's not going to do that. Why? He's never won double-digit games in all of his years coaching. The most games he's ever won was a decade ago at USC. He went 9-4. He averaged in 5 seasons at Washington 6.8 wins. And you go, well, it's Washington. Yeah. Chris Peterson won big there. Kalen DeBoer winning big there. You can win at Washington. Sark did not. The other thing, his time at Texas hasn't gone that well. 2 years ago, 5-7, pretty ugly. I think last year was even uglier because of the talent they had on their team. They had elite running backs. I mean, they played in a conference that isn't very good, and they went 8-5. If he goes 8-5 again this year, I think he would be in major trouble. They're going to the SEC next year. He has proven nothing. It'd be one thing. Part of the reason Jim Harbaugh was able to just kind of navigate when things got a little weird is his resume. It's like, well, this guy has been a winner his entire life. He will figure it out. Look at what this guy did early on when he got here, obviously with the 49ers at Stanford. He's our guy, but he's proven it. So let's stick with him. And that's played out. It took a little bit longer, but back-to-back playoffs, right? And now it's like the standard so high. It's like, can he win in the playoffs? Sark would die just to be in the Big 12 championship game. And I think I saw a headline last week is the goal is to win the Big 12. Bro, the goal should just be to win, like not lose conference games, not lose to Texas Tech, not lose to Kansas. But if you're losing those games, you don't have a snowball's chance in hell against the Tennessees, the Georgias, the Alabamas, the LSUs, and the Ole Misses. They're going to destroy you. So the only thing I could see keeping his head above water is the recruitment and the landing of Arch Manning. So maybe that has some, ability to keep his head afloat. If this year is another 8-5 with Quinn Ewers and it just looks a little weird, maybe Arch goes to the mat for him. But I don't know, man. I think anything less than 10 wins, I would say Sark's job is in major, major jeopardy. We're going to end with 3 NFL coaches. Number 3, Robert Saleh. Anytime you're in a big market, a lot more eyeballs, a lot more people talking about you. Anytime you trade for one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, obviously there puts a lot more pressure on your organization. And I do think one reason, several reasons, and a lot of people have talked about this, Hard Knocks. No one wants Hard Knocks in their building. And we can argue, if nobody wants this in the entire league to be part of it, isn't it time to pivot? Like, I don't understand the point of the show if no one wants it, especially when the show just kind of replicates what we see on these teams' website. If I can get the same information from going to Jets.com, they put out a show. It's going to be very similar to what we get in Hard Knocks because they have editorial control. So if we are getting the same thing, why don't we just end this show? Right? I mean, just pretend it's no longer what it is. And the partners in the league that are making you the money don't want any part of it. It is not necessary anymore for the growth of the game, in my opinion. But part of the reason he doesn't want it is it just adds an element of pressure. And I think that if they don't make the playoffs, he's done. And I think Joe Douglas would be done. Now, I think highly of him. I think, when I say Bill Belichick's on the hot seat, I still think he's the greatest NFL coach of all time. I think Robert Saleh, is he a good head coach? I don't know. He could be my defensive coordinator any day. Is Joe Douglas a good GM? 100%. Has he hit on a lot of players? 100%. Anytime you draft a quarterback at number 2, and it's as colossal of a miss as it is, your clock starts when you're not winning. The 49ers might have done it, but they kept winning. If you win, who cares? You can miss on all the draft picks in the fucking world. No one gives a shit when you win. Who you draft, who you sign in free agent, none of it matters. Belichick's missing a lot of draft picks. When he was winning 13 games a year, going to the Super Bowl, we didn't talk about it. You start winning 8 games, we talk about it. Aaron Rodgers is a little bit of cover for all those mistakes. Now, if he plays as well as he did in 2020 and 2021, the Jets will be in the playoffs. But if the Dolphins keep their quarterback healthy and they're good again, the Bills keep rolling, we know how stacked the AFC is, Belichick's feisty, you miss the playoffs. I think Robert Saleh, and I would include Joe Douglas, would be adios. Number 2, this one's pretty simple. Anytime you get new ownership in the NFL or in any sport, everything is up in the air when it comes to head coaching and executives with the team. That includes people, not just the GM, but team president. Like everyone's job is on the line. And Josh Harris, who owns the Sixers, has just shown he just fired Doc Rivers. They're going to playoffs every year. He's fired Brett Brown, who was winning. Now, not winning at the highest level, but it's not like the Sixers are used to much success, right? So this guy in the NFL, we see it all the time. You get a new owner. Maybe that head coach gets a year. Honestly, even if he's somewhat successful, goes above 500, makes a wild card, that doesn't guarantee him anything. And a lot like, speaking of the college coaches that have some equity, Ron Rivera's history is not great. He has 3 career playoff victories. He has never had a winning season in his 3 years with Washington. They went to the playoffs his first year, but he was 7-9. Division was a joke. So I think this one's simple. Ron not only has to make the playoffs, I think he'd probably have to win a game to survive. And even then, I don't think it guarantees you anything. We just saw the Phoenix Suns. Guy pays all this money for the Phoenix Suns. Their head coach had got to a finals before, was in the second round of the playoffs. See ya. Adios. You're gone. Matt Ishbia is like, peace out, brother. Nice knowing you. It's been real. It's been fun. Heard you're pretty good, but see you later. That guy got $80 million to go to the Detroit Pistons. He's a legitimate NBA coach. Didn't matter. Ron Rivera, I don't think, would be a head coach anymore. Who knows? Maybe he'd not even coach anymore. But I think anything less than a playoff victory, because I'd be hard-pressed to see them. How could they win the division? Honestly, best case scenario, they would be 3rd place in that division, but behind the Cowboys and the Eagles, but would be some postseason success and kind of prove that maybe they got a gem in Sam Howell, like once upon a time they had in Kirk Cousins as a mid-round pick. And first, I think by a wide margin, is Brandon Staley. Because unlike these guys, Belichick, Mac Jones, Robert Saleh, Aaron Rodgers, but he's old and he could retire, and Ron Rivera, not really a quarterback. Brandon Staley has Justin Herbert, who's in his mid-20s, who every team in the league beside the Bills, the Bengals, and the Chiefs would take their quarterback, right? The Ravens would trade for Justin Herbert yesterday. They would. So you have Justin Herbert. You struck oil and got lucky because Tua was taken ahead of him. It's one of the great, and I understand it at the time, Justin Herbert is a much better NFL player than he was a college player. And he was a solid college player, but he has shocked a lot of us. I watched him a lot in college. I liked him, but I never thought he'd be a top 5 quarterback. Turns out he is. And anytime you have that with a lot of talent on your roster, I'll say this for Tom Telesco. He has done a really good job over the years. Hasn't been perfect. No GM is. I don't necessarily blame him for the coaching hires because I do think their owner plays a huge, huge role in it. Doesn't want to pay any money. He doesn't want a $15 million coach. He likes having a coach who is toward the bottom of the barrel when it comes to coaching salaries. And he got Brandon Staley, who was a good defensive coordinator for the 1 year he was a defensive coordinator in the NFL. But last year was pretty embarrassing. He's up big in the first half in a wild card game where the other quarterback throws 4 interceptions. He's up 27-0 at one point in time. I think the Jacks scored right before halftime to make it 27-7. Under no circumstances can you lose that game. So it's not just they've underachieved. It's the one playoff game that he did coach in was an all-time disaster. And I don't expect him to win the division. But when you have a player of Justin Herbert's ability and you have the talent in which you have all over the roster, you got to make some noise in the playoffs. I think anything less than a playoff victory, adios, Brandon Staley. And if their offense is better and their defense that has had moments over last year ultimately let him down in the playoffs, Colin and I talked about this too. They're not hiring some Sean Payton. They're not hiring whoever the Bill Parcells is. They're not Lincoln Riley. He's not spending $16-17 million on Lincoln Riley. Kellen Moore will be the next head coach. So I think Brandon Staley is basically just coaching to make sure that Kellen Moore is not the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers in 2024.